The story kicks off inside a Belfast bank that someone is already targeting. A group of men quietly track the bank manager, Richard Murray. As soon as he walks into the branch, security guard Jim asks who's getting laid off. Richard shrugs the question off, acting clueless. Moments later, he notices employee Barry lazily spinning his keys. Richard snaps, telling him he's in a position of trust and swinging vault keys like that makes it easy for anyone to distract him and grab them. He adds that Barry's attitude and loud mouth are exactly why he's still buried in the vault. Not long after, Barry appears dressed as Santa, handing out secret Santa presents to the staff. Everyone shows up except Richard. New recruit Paul spots a staff cuts file on Richard's desk. He immediately runs to Barry and security officer Mags and spills what he saw. As soon as Mags hears it, panic flickers in her eyes. Richard, meanwhile, is under crushing pressure from head office to announce layoffs right before Christmas. At home, his wife shifts her belongings into the spare room, exhausted with the marriage. She only sees Richard on weekends. When he asks if the mortgage will pay itself if he quits, she bites back that she's not his wife anymore, just the housemaid, and all they ever exchange is small talk. His phone rings again, swallowing what's left of his personal life. At the same time, Barry is drinking in a bar. He gets waved over to a back table where shots are waiting. Once he's properly drunk, one of the men casually starts asking about his work, assuming he must be fairly senior by now. He mentions he's heard Barry carries the vault keys. Barry nods and admits the keys stay with him. On Sunday, December 19th, two supposed officers arrive outside Richard's house, claiming there has been an accident and asking to come in. They're imposters, criminals in police uniforms. They grab Richard and his wife. The same thing happens to Barry and his mother. They warn Barry that if he does as he's told, his mum will stay safe. They confirm he has the bank keys in the house. Then they order him to collect the keys, pack everything he needs for work the next day, and leave the rest because he's not coming back home. Barry complies. Over at Richard's house, another thug guards his wife, Celine. Her gaze drifts toward a nearby red panic button. The thug pulls her onto the bed and ties her hands. As he's about to tape her eyes, she begs to wear a hat instead. From outside, Richard begs them not to hurt her. The thug yells back that it all depends on the bank manager. Barry is brought over to Richard's place as well. Richard asks if he recognizes any of them. Barry says no, then recalls the strange bar conversation. Pushed by Richard, Barry admits a stranger had been grilling him about his job at the bar. One of the kidnappers sits across from them and mocks. Another Murray and McKenna run in. Barry and Richard clearly share bad blood, but the thug cuts off their argument. He tells them serious people are behind this, and both men will follow orders. If Richard steps out of line, Barry's mother dies. If Barry fails, Richard's wife dies. They shout over each other, insisting they don't want responsibility for the other's family. The thug presses on, saying they'll each get a phone, with Barry receiving two. The purpose of each phone will become clear soon. He lays out the plan. Sometime tomorrow, a white box van will pull up near the bank, posing as a rubbish collection vehicle. Without alerting security, they must somehow load 3 cages of cash into that van. None of the gang will go inside. Every part of this heist must be executed by Barry and Richard alone. The next morning, Richard tries to hide a head wound with makeup. Barry walks in and points out he's only making it look worse. They head toward the bank. On the way, Barry says he'll have to neutralize security, since Mags will never let a single cent leave. Richard refuses to allow any violence toward his staff. He also notes that the main thug called Barry Baz, like an old friend, and questions why Barry got 2 phones. Barry insists he doesn't know. Then he turns on Richard, claiming he's always been treated like something stuck to Richard's shoe and that once Richard figured out who he was, his fate was sealed. He says promotion was never on the table. They argue until they're close to the bank, where Richard drops Barry off down the road so they won't be seen arriving together. As soon as Richard steps inside, Mags notices his head injury. He quickly tells her a rubbish company is coming later to collect. When she asks for details, he stalls, saying he'll get settled first. Richard heads straight to his office and digs through drawers until he finds a screwdriver. Barry, meanwhile, spirals, trying to remember what he might have blurted out while drunk. He deliberately injures his own hand. Richard goes to the staff lockers and asks cleaner Jeff which one is Barry's. He uses the screwdriver to force it open and finds a diary, which he takes back to his office. Just then, an employee rushes in to say head office is furious and wants the redundancy list immediately. At that exact moment, the thug phone in Richard's pocket starts ringing. He drops the head office issue and runs outside to answer. The kidnappers berate him for taking too long and say this was only a test. When they call for real, he must answer instantly or his wife dies. The pressure of the upcoming robbery now weighs heavily on both men. Back at Barry's house, the thug guarding his mother steps into the kitchen. She slips her hands free, tries to dial out, but the phone line is dead. She hastily writes a note and pushes it toward the letterbox, only for the thug to catch her. He warns her not to move again. He then calls Barry and orders him to calm his mum down. Barry talks her through breathing exercises, knowing she suffers from asthma. Moments later, the gang calls Barry again. They now demand an extra sweetener, 1 million in 20s by 625. Pulling that much from a bank packed with cameras sounds impossible. Barry reaches his locker and finds it pried open. Jeff says Richard did it, but Barry covers for him, claiming he asked Richard to break in. Barry grabs a bag and tells Richard about the new demand. Richard questions the sudden change. Barry tells him to ring them back and ask. Richard instead phones Mags, saying he still doesn't know exactly when the rubbish crew will arrive and will update her when they do. He hangs up quickly. Barry keeps the bag out of camera range and carries it toward the vault. He and Richard go in together. The cameras follow them right up to the vault door, with Mags carefully watching. Barry uses his key and opens it, revealing piles of cash. Richard rolls a cage into position to block the camera's view. Barry starts cramming money into the bag, but Richard abruptly grabs him by the collar and yanks his phones. He sees 3 calls logged and demands to know who they were. Richard warns this will end in disaster and that if Barry's involved, he'll have to vanish too. Barry shoves him hard, and their scuffle is caught on CCTV. Barry insists it's just his gym bag and asks if Richard really thinks he'd drag his own mother into it if he were behind the plan. Their buried history surfaces. Barry's father killed Richard's father. Barry says he doesn't even know if that's true, but he's not his dad and Richard isn't his. In this moment, they're equals. Mags walks in right then. They hastily hide the bag. She says she saw Richard fall on camera. They claim he slipped. She notices Barry's injured hand and they improvise another excuse. She believes them and leaves. At that point, Richard's thug phone rings again, but there's no signal in the vault. Barry's phone starts ringing too, and he sprints upstairs to get a signal. Security watches baffled as he rushes straight into the women's restroom. Around then, Richard finally gets the redundancy list from head office. Seeing Mags's name on it shocks him. Later, he asks Barry what the call was about, and Barry says they were just checking up. They finish stuffing the bag with cash. Once it's full, Barry panics, convinced the gang will execute his mother and Richard's wife if he slips. He says he can't do it. Richard talks him down. Barry takes the bag and leaves the vault. Richard sends the remaining staff home early for Christmas shopping, but when he returns to his office, the redundancy list is no longer in his pocket. It's fallen somewhere in the bank. At the exit, Barry reaches Jim, who has to check bags before anyone leaves. Jim tells him to open it. Barry pretends the zipper is stuck. Right then, a wave of employees arrives, distracting Jim. He opens the door to let everyone out, and Barry slips through with them. Jim shrugs it off and tells him to leave it. Mags then approaches Richard, demanding to know why he sent everyone home. She tells him to be straight with her. If layoffs are coming, she needs to know now to prepare. Richard promises she won't be on the list and urges her to trust him, telling her to go shopping and insisting he and Jim can handle things. Mags replies that she doesn't need shopping time. She needs her job. Meanwhile, as Barry walks with the cash bag, a friend grabs it and asks what's inside. Barry snatches it back and keeps going. Inside the bank, Richard waits nervously for him. After what feels like ages, Barry comes back and says a kid showed up to take the bag and he didn't recognize him. Immediately afterward, Richard receives a photo showing his wife held at gunpoint. Barry gets a matching image of his mother. Their phone rings, and they race to the elevator and head upstairs to answer. The caller orders them to have 3 cages of cash ready, adding that Barry will call when it's all set. Richard informs Mags that the rubbish contractor will be collecting soon. She asks if he finally has their details. He says not yet. They start loading cash into the cages when Jim walks in. They hide the money as fast as they can. Jim asks for the name of the rubbish company. Richard says he'll see it when they show up. Jim's gaze shifts to a chair concealing the cash, and he offers to move it, but Richard stops him, saying it belongs to the bank. Jim leaves. The thug phone rings again, and Richard rushes upstairs to answer. The gang says they're ready. Richard and Barry cover the cages and wheel them out so the cameras can't see the contents. On the way, one cage tips and cash spills all over the floor, but by pure luck Jim and Mags aren't watching the monitors. They gather the money, hide it, and shove the cages through the main doors to where a van is parked. They load the cages inside. A group of drunk women staggers past, briefly blocking everything, and once they've gone, the last cage goes in. The kidnappers keep Barry in the van as leverage. Richard is ordered back into the bank to await further instructions. Jim comes over and asks if the rubbish company took their cases. Richard lies that they'll return tomorrow. After a drink, Richard starts to suspect Barry might have been involved from the start. He opens Barry's diary and finds names and amounts listed. He dials emergency services, but the thug phone rings before the call connects. Barry's voice says they're coming back because the gang wants more cash and he'll arrive in 20 minutes. Meanwhile, Richard's wife is being marched deeper into the forest. She begs them, if they're going to kill her, at least return her body to her family. Back inside the bank, Richard loads yet another cage with money. At the same time, the redundancy list ends up in Mags's hands. She begins combing the building for him. Richard, heading up in the elevator with the next cage, spots her outside and keeps the doors closed so she can't see him. He goes back down and tells Jim to buzz him through because the rubbish company is coming for more. Jim lets him step outside. The thugs open the van and drag Barry out just as Mags arrives and catches sight of the cash hidden in the cage. She says nothing, turns around, and walks away. A passing patrol officer notices the van and the people hanging around it. Deep in the woods, Richard's wife pulls off her hat and realizes she's alone. No captors in sight. She starts walking and soon comes upon her car, burning in front of her. Back at the bank, Richard finishes loading the final cage. The lead thug tells them they'll be able to return to their normal lives in an hour. A car pulls up beside Richard's wife, and the driver calls the police to report the bank robbery. At Barry's home, the thug guarding his mother tells her he's leaving but instructs her to stay on the floor for 1 hour. The patrol officer radios in the suspicious van and the group around it, but by the time police arrive, the van has vanished. They report no suspicious activity. Inside the bank, Barry breaks down, repeatedly asking if his mother and Richard's wife will survive. That's when it hits Richard. He has spent his entire life chained to his job and never truly paid attention to his wife. He returns Barry's diary and confesses he assumed the listed amounts were gang payments. Barry notes that 30 quid would be a pathetic payoff and explains their football club membership fees. All along, Mags has been watching them from the CCTV room. Eventually, Richard reunites with his wife and Barry with his mother. More than 45 detectives are assigned to hunt the robbers. But who actually masterminded the heist? To this day, police still don't know. The story is based on a real bank robbery from 2004. Let me know in the comments what you thought of this recap.